The rope that held the hemp rope hangs slack against the cliff face of Hacksaw Ridge, its fibers dark with morning rain. Desmond Doss tests each knot with trembling fingers, knowing that in a few hours this makeshift lifeline will be all that stands between wounded men and 100-foot drop to the rocks below. The 77th Infantry Division has spent 3 days preparing for this assault on Okinawa's most fortified position, and everyone knows the Japanese defenders above have had months to prepare their welcome. "Check that anchor point again," the lieutenant calls through the pre-dawn mist. "If that rope fails when we're bringing casualties down, we lose everything we fought for up there." Desmond nods, though his stomach churns at the casual assumption of wounded men. Not if, but when. The officers have been honest about the expected casualty rates for taking the ridge. 50% losses, maybe more. The Japanese have turned the plateau above into a killing field, with concealed positions covering every approach. Most assaults have ended in full retreat within hours. What makes this morning different is the artillery preparation. For 30 minutes, American guns have pounded the ridge with everything available. The bombardment should have softened the defenses, cleared the caves, silenced the machine gun nests. Should have. But as the shells lift and the infantry prepares to climb, Desmond can hear something that chills him more than the rain soaking through his uniform, absolute silence from above. "Doss, you staying down here with the aid station?" Sergeant Howell's voice carries a familiar edge of skepticism. 3 months of training together hasn't erased his doubts about having an unarmed medic in the unit. Ridge is no place for someone who won't shoot back. The question hangs in the air like smoke. Desmond's medical kit weighs heavy on his shoulders, packed with morphine syrettes, battle dressings and tourniquets instead of ammunition. His M1 carbine, standard issue even for medics, remains locked in the supply tent. Some battles he's won, some he's lost, but the war over carrying a weapon ended months ago with a compromise nobody likes. He goes forward with the assault force, but he goes unarmed. "I'll be where the wounded are, Sergeant." The simplicity of the answer seems to frustrate Howell more than argument would. Around them, riflemen check their equipment one final time before the climb. Extra ammunition, grenades, bayonets fixed. They look like soldiers preparing for war. Desmond looks like a man preparing for surgery in a place where surgery shouldn't be possible. The ridge looms above them, its coral face gleaming wet in the growing light. Intelligence reports describe a plateau roughly 400 yards long and 200 wide, honeycombed with caves and connected tunnels. The Japanese have had unlimited time to prepare positions, lay mines, sight their weapons. Taking the ridge means climbing exposed cliff faces under direct fire, then fighting across open ground with no cover except shell holes and the scattered debris of previous failed assaults. Private Martinez appears beside him, young face pale under his helmet. "Doss, you really going up there without a rifle?" "That's right. What if the Japanese break through our line? What if they come straight for you?" Desmond tests the rope one more time, feeling the individual strands stretch under tension. "Then I guess I better trust someone else to do the shooting." The answer doesn't satisfy Martinez, but orders are already flowing down the line. First platoon over the cliff nets, second platoon following, medics and support personnel moving with the advance elements. In theory, the rope system will allow rapid evacuation of casualties. In practice, everything depends on securing the plateau and holding it long enough for wounded men to be lowered to safety. As he adjusts his aid kit and prepares to climb, Desmond offers a quiet prayer, not for victory or even survival, but for strength to do his job when the time comes. Around him, other men whisper their own words to whatever gods they carry. Some clutch photographs, others check weapons one final time. All of them know that in 20 minutes they'll be climbing toward a place designed to kill them. The rope will be tested today, so will everything else. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation. And stay with us for the next chapters. The climb up Hacksaw Ridge turns Desmond's legs to water before he's halfway to the top. The coral cliff face, slick with overnight rain and churned by artillery, offers handholds that crumble under weight and footholds that slide away just when they're needed most. Below him, the aid station shrinks to the size of a postage stamp. Above, the rim of the plateau shows no movement, no sign of the Japanese positions that intelligence promises are waiting. The silence bothers him more than gunfire would. After 30 minutes of American artillery preparation, the ridge should be a moonscape of shattered positions and scattered equipment. Instead, it feels like climbing toward a held breath, a pause before something terrible begins. Almost there, Martinez gasps from the rope net beside him. The private's rifle keeps catching on the coral, forcing him to maneuver awkwardly around each obstacle. Maybe the barrage got them all. Desmond doesn't answer, but he doubts artillery solved anything. The Japanese on Okinawa have proven themselves masters of deep fortifications, connected cave systems that can withstand bombardment and emerge intact when the shells lift. The 77th Infantry Division has learned this lesson on other ridges, other hills, where positions that seemed destroyed suddenly came alive with renewed fire. 10 yards below them, Sergeant Howell calls up through the morning mist. "Move faster up there. We're bunching up on these nets like targets in a shooting gallery. The urgency is real. Strung out on the cliff face, the assault force makes perfect targets for plunging fire from above. Every additional minute spent climbing increases the chance that concealed positions will open fire on men who can't shoot back, can't take cover, can't do anything except try to scramble faster up rain-slick rock." Desmond's aid kit bangs against his back with each movement, the metal instruments inside clanking softly. Morphine syrettes, battle dressings, tourniquets, a small bottle of iodine that he's managed to keep unbroken through 2 weeks of combat operations. Everything he needs to treat sucking chest wounds, arterial bleeding, compound fractures, and the dozen other ways the human body fails under fire. Everything except the tools to prevent those wounds in the first place. Above him, the first soldiers reach the plateau rim and disappear over the edge. Still no firing, still no sound of contact. For a moment, hope flickers that maybe the artillery preparation accomplished more than expected. Maybe the ridge really is clear, the defenders withdrawn or eliminated. Then the machine guns open fire. The sound comes from everywhere at once, not single positions, but a network of interlocking fields of fire that turn the plateau into a killing zone. Muzzle flashes wink from cave mouths, from camouflaged positions, from holes in the ground that weren't there moments before. The Japanese have waited until half the assault force climbed onto the plateau before revealing their positions. "Medic!" The first call comes within seconds, carried on the wind from somewhere above. Then another and another, until the voices blend into a chorus that cuts through the gunfire like a knife. Desmond hauls himself over the rim and into hell. The plateau spreads before him like a vision from a fever dream. What intelligence described as open ground proves to be a maze of coral ridges, deep fissures, and camouflaged positions. The American artillery has churned the surface into a landscape of overlapping shell holes, but underneath, the Japanese tunnel system remains intact. Machine gun fire sweeps the open areas, while rifle fire picks off anyone who tries to move between positions. "Get down!" Martinez rolls into a shell hole as bullets snap overhead. Jesus, they let us climb all the way up just to kill us on top. The tactic is brutally effective. Caught in the open with minimal cover, the assault force can't advance and doesn't dare retreat. The cliff nets that brought them up now represent death traps. Anyone trying to climb down will be cut apart before reaching safety. The only choice is forward, into positions designed to funnel attackers into predetermined killing zones. Desmond low crawls toward the sound of wounded voices, his aid kit dragging in the mud. 50 yards ahead, he can see men huddled in shell holes, some moving, others ominously still. The rope system he rigged this morning dangles uselessly over the cliff edge, too far away to reach under the current fire. Getting casualties to the evacuation point will mean dragging them across open ground, swept by machine guns. "Medic, over here!" The voice comes from a crater to his left, where someone waves frantically. Martinez is hit bad. The private who climbed beside him 20 minutes ago lies crumpled against the coral, his rifle flung aside, both hands pressed against his stomach. Blood seeps between his fingers, and his face has gone the color of old paper. Desmond slides into the crater and begins working, hands moving with trained efficiency despite the bullets cracking overhead. "You're going to be fine," he tells Martinez, though the wound looks anything but fine. "Just hold still while I get this bandage in place." The lie comes easily, part of the medic's job. Hope sometimes works better than morphine, and Martinez needs both right now. Around them, the battle for Hacksaw Ridge has devolved into a stalemate that favors the defenders. American forces hold scattered positions across the plateau, but can't advance against the interlocking fields of fire. Japanese positions remain largely intact, their tunnel system allowing rapid movement and reinforcement. And somewhere in this maze of coral and gunfire, men are calling for help that may never come. By mid-afternoon, Hacksaw Ridge has become a graveyard of stalled ambitions. The 77th Infantry Division holds perhaps a third of the plateau, scattered across isolated shell holes and temporary positions that offer concealment but little real protection. Japanese fire continues from positions that seem to multiply rather than diminish. Each cave mouth cleared reveals 2 more. Each tunnel system extends deeper than the previous estimate suggested. Desmond has made 6 trips to the rope evacuation point, each journey a crawling nightmare across ground swept by interlocking fields of fire. The hemp line he tested this morning now bears bloodstains and burns from rifle bullets that passed too close. Martinez went down first, then Corporal Williams, then 3 men whose names he never learned. Each evacuation means dragging a wounded man across 50 yards of open ground while Japanese riflemen try to add to the casualty count. "We can't hold this," Sergeant Howell gasps, sliding into the crater where Desmond works on a leg wound. "Battalion's talking about pulling back to the base of the ridge and trying again tomorrow." The news hits like a physical blow. Withdrawal means abandoning the wounded who can't move, leaving them for Japanese forces that have shown little interest in taking prisoners. It means admitting that 3 days of preparation and 30 minutes of artillery barrage accomplished nothing except filling aid stations with casualties. "What about the men who can't move?" Desmond asks, nodding toward a shell hole 20 yards away where someone has been calling weakly for help. "We just leave them up here." Howell's face twists with frustration. "Orders are orders, Doss. We can't save everybody." But the logic doesn't penetrate. Somewhere in the maze of coral and gunfire, American soldiers lie wounded and waiting for help that military necessity says won't come. The tactical situation makes sense. Holding the plateau costs more than it gains, and consolidating forces for another assault offers better odds of success. The human situation makes no sense at all. "Give me 10 more minutes," Desmond says, checking his aid kit. 3 morphine syrettes left, 1 battle dressing, a handful of gauze that's more brown than white. Not much to work with, but enough for 1 or 2 more wounded. "I think I can reach that shell hole." "Negative," Howell snaps. "You go out there now, and you're just another casualty for someone else to carry. We're moving back to the nets in 5 minutes. The order is sensible, even humane. Desmond represents a valuable asset. Trained medics don't grow on trees, and losing him to achieve nothing helps nobody. But sense and humanity sometimes point in different directions, and the voice from the distant shell hole keeps calling through the gunfire. Around them, other soldiers begin the careful withdrawal toward the cliff edge, moving in pairs, using every scrap of cover, trying to reach the rope nets without drawing concentrated fire from Japanese positions. Some make it. Others don't. The plateau that took 3 hours to secure will be abandoned in 20 minutes, leaving nothing behind except blood stains on coral and the knowledge that tomorrow will require doing it all again. "Doss, you coming?" Martinez calls from near the cliff edge, where he waits despite the wound in his shoulder. "We need to go now before they figure out what we're doing." The question hangs in the air like smoke. Standard doctrine says, retreat with the unit. Preserve strength for future operations. Accept that some battles can't be won with good intentions and medical supplies. Everything in his training points toward the cliff edge and relative safety. Everything except the voice still calling from the shell hole, weaker now but persistent. Desmond looks at his aid kit, at the fraying rope that's carried 6 wounded men to safety, at the faces of soldiers who've watched him work under fire for the past 6 hours. Some show respect, others confusion, most just the exhausted indifference that comes with surviving another failed assault. "You go ahead," he tells Howell. "I'll catch up." "Like hell you will. That's a direct order, medic." "Yes, Sergeant." But instead of moving toward the nets, Desmond begins checking his remaining supplies. 3 syrettes, 1 dressing, enough gauze for basic wound care. Not much to work with, but maybe enough for 1 more. Just 1 more. The voice from the shell hole has gone quiet, but that might mean unconsciousness rather than death. Unconsciousness can be treated. Death is permanent. Behind him, the withdrawal continues as American forces abandon their hard-won positions. Ahead, Japanese defenders maintain their fields of fire and wait for the next assault. And somewhere between retreat and advance, between military necessity and human obligation, one unarmed medic makes a choice that will follow him for the rest of his life. The rope waits at the cliff edge, tested and ready. One way or another, it will be used again before this day ends. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. Darkness falls on Hacksaw Ridge like a curtain dropping on a stage, but the performance continues in whispers and shadows. The 77th Infantry Division has withdrawn to positions at the base of the cliff, leaving the plateau to Japanese forces and whatever American wounded couldn't be evacuated during the chaotic retreat. Official casualty reports list 43 men lost, killed, wounded or missing in action. Unofficial reports whisper higher numbers. Desmond Doss remains on the plateau. He made the decision during the withdrawal, when orders pointed toward the cliff nets and conscience pointed toward voices calling from the darkness. Now, 12 hours later, he moves through a landscape transformed by night into something from another world. Shell holes become caverns, coral ridges become mountains, and every shadow might conceal friend or enemy. The rope system he rigged this morning has become his lifeline in ways he never imagined. Instead of evacuating casualties during combat, he now uses it to lower wounded men through darkness while Japanese patrols search the plateau. The hemp line, burned by bullets and stained with blood, holds firm against weight it was never designed to carry. "Easy now," he whispers to Corporal Williams, securing the line around the wounded man's chest. A rifle bullet through the leg has left Williams conscious but unable to walk, stranded in a crater for 14 hours while the battle raged around him. "We're going to get you down from here." Williams' eyes reflect starlight and something close to disbelief. "Doss? Jesus, I thought you went down with the others. What are you still doing up here?" The question has no good answer. Military logic demanded withdrawal with his unit. Personal safety suggested following orders and preserving himself for future operations. Even medical doctrine pointed toward consolidating assets rather than risking trained personnel on impossible missions. But voices in the darkness had called his name, and his feet had refused to move toward the nets. "Just hold still while I get this rigged," Desmond murmurs, testing each knot twice before committing Williams' weight to the system. "Keep quiet on the way down." Japanese patrols are moving around down there. The lowering process requires 15 minutes of careful work, hand over hand, testing each foot of rope, listening for sounds that might indicate enemy movement below. Williams weighs perhaps 160 pounds, but exhaustion makes every foot feel like lowering a truck. When the rope finally goes slack, Desmond knows another wounded man has reached the aid station alive. 42 to go. The number comes from his own count, not official reports. Moving carefully through the battlefield after dark, he's found men that didn't make the casualty lists. Some wounded, some dead, some hovering between categories. The wounded call to him when they hear movement, desperate voices cutting through the darkness with pleas that would break a stronger man's heart. "Medic, over here!" The voice comes from a crater 30 yards away, near positions the unit held briefly before falling back. Desmond crawls toward the sound, his aid kit dragging in coral and mud. Movement on the plateau means death if Japanese sentries spot him, but wounded men need help whether the tactical situation makes sense or not. Private Jackson lies at the bottom of the shell hole, his right arm twisted at angles that shouldn't be possible. A machine gun burst caught him during the retreat, shattering bone and shredding muscle. He's been conscious for hours, afraid to call out, afraid to move, afraid that morning will bring Japanese troops with bayonets rather than American rescue. "You came back," Jackson whispers as Desmond begins working on the arm. "I heard them say you went down with the others." "I'm still here." The morphine syringe goes into Jackson's shoulder, buying time against pain that would otherwise drive men insane. The pressure bandages stop bleeding that's already gone on too long. But the arm needs surgery, clean facilities, equipment that doesn't exist on a contested plateau in the middle of the Pacific. "Can you make it to the rope?" Desmond asks, knowing the answer before Jackson tries to move. The wounded private makes it perhaps 3 feet before collapsing, his face gray with shock and blood loss. "I don't think so, Doc. I don't think I can make it that far." So Desmond makes 2 trips. First to position the rope and test the anchor points, then back to collect Jackson and begin the careful journey across open ground. 50 yards of crawling while Japanese patrols move through the darkness, dragging a wounded man who can barely remain conscious. The rope holds. It has held for Williams, for 3 others whose names blur together in exhaustion, and now for Jackson. Each evacuation strains the hemp fibers closer to their breaking point, but the knots remain secure, and the anchor point shows no signs of failure. By 0300 hours, Desmond has found and evacuated 18 wounded men. His aid kit is empty, his hands raw from rope burns, his body running on determination and adrenaline rather than actual strength. The plateau around him has fallen quiet, except for distant sounds of movement. Japanese forces consolidating their positions, American forces preparing for tomorrow's assault. And somewhere in the maze of shell holes and coral ridges, voices continue calling through the darkness. Wounded men who've waited 16 hours for help that military necessity says won't come. The rope waits at the cliff edge, tested beyond its limits, but still holding. One way or another, it will carry them all down from this place of death, one man at a time, hand over hand, until every voice has been answered and every wound tended, even if it takes all night, even if it costs everything he has. Just one more, always just one more. The rope breaks on the 23rd evacuation. Desmond feels it go as he lowers Sergeant Mitchell toward the aid station, individual hemp strands snapping under stress until only half the line bears the wounded man's weight. For a terrifying moment, the sergeant swings against the cliff face while the remaining fibers stretch and groan. Then hands reach up from below to steady the stretcher, and Mitchell disappears into darkness toward medical care. But the lifeline that connected him to safety now hangs useless, its frayed ends telling a story of impossible strain. 23 wounded men have ridden that rope down from Hacksaw Ridge, and 23 times it held, despite bullets, blood, and weight it was never designed to carry. Now it's finished. and Desmond finds himself alone on a plateau controlled by enemy forces with no way down except the path that brought him up, straight through Japanese positions in broad daylight. The realization should terrify him. Instead, it brings something approaching peace. For 12 hours, he's moved through this nightmare landscape guided by a simple principle: find the wounded, treat what can be treated, evacuate who can be evacuated. The tactical situation, the enemy positions, the impossibility of what he was attempting, none of that mattered when measured against voices calling for help in the darkness. Now, with dawn approaching and the rope system destroyed, he faces the truth that's been lurking beneath every evacuation. He never expected to leave this ridge alive. The knowledge sits quietly in his mind, like a stone dropped into still water. Not despair or self-pity, just recognition of mathematical realities. One unarmed man on a plateau controlled by enemy forces has approximately 0 chance of survival once daylight reveals his position. The Japanese will find him and they will kill him, and the rope that might have carried him to safety now lies broken at the bottom of a cliff. But 23 wounded Americans are alive this morning because he stayed. 23 families will see their sons again. 23 mothers will receive letters instead of folded flags. The arithmetic of sacrifice has never seemed clearer. Medic. The voice comes from a shell hole near the eastern edge of the plateau where dawn light reveals movement. Help me! 24. There's still time for one more. The voice belongs to Lieutenant Morrison, the platoon leader who'd briefed them on assault objectives 18 hours and a lifetime ago. A mortar round has opened his chest like a flower, and blood soaks the coral beneath him in a spreading pool. He's conscious but fading, his eyes tracking movement with the desperate intensity of a man who knows he's dying. Lieutenant? Desmond slides into the crater and begins working with supplies scavenged from other casualties. No morphine left, no proper bandages, just torn cloth and determination. You're going to be all right. Doss? The officer's voice carries bewilderment along with pain. How are you still up here? Easy, sir. Just lie still while I get this bleeding stopped, but there's too much damage and too few supplies. Morrison's wounds need a surgical team and a clean operating room, not improvised field medicine in a shell hole on contested ground. Still, Desmond works with the dedication of a man who has nothing left to lose, applying pressure here, improvising bandages there, doing whatever might buy another few minutes of life. The others, Morrison whispers. Did they make it down? 23 so far. Ropes broken now, but they made it down. Morrison's eyes widen with something approaching understanding. You stayed. After the withdrawal order, you stayed up here. Yes, sir. How many did you find? Desmond pauses in his work, mentally counting faces in the darkness. Some conscious, some unconscious, some barely clinging to life. Williams, Jackson, Mitchell, and 20 others whose names blur together in exhaustion. Each one a story, a family, a future that might have ended on this ridge. 23 evacuated so far, maybe more out there, but I haven't found them yet. Morrison attempts a smile that turns into a grimace of pain. 23, Christ, Doss. They'll give you the Medal of Honor for this. The suggestion seems absurd. Medals are for heroes, and heroes are mythical figures who act without fear or doubt. What happened on Hacksaw Ridge feels more like stubborn desperation than heroism. One man, too frightened to leave and too stubborn to die, moving from crater to crater because standing still meant listening to voices calling for help. But Morrison's breathing has grown shallow, and his skin has taken on the waxy pallor that means shock and blood loss are winning their race against medical intervention. The lieutenant who led them up the cliff 18 hours ago will not be going down alive. Sir, I need to tell you something, Desmond says, leaning close. The confession has been building in his mind for hours, the weight of truth that needs speaking before it's too late. I was scared. The whole time I was scared. I stayed because I couldn't leave, not because I was brave. Morrison's eyes focus one final time. Courage isn't not being afraid, Doss. Courage is being afraid and staying anyway. You stayed. The lieutenant dies as dawn breaks fully over Hacksaw Ridge, revealing a battlefield transformed by 12 hours of solitary rescue work. Shell holes that held wounded men now stand empty except for bloodstains and discarded equipment. The plateau, that claimed 43 casualties yesterday, has given back 23 lives, pulled from darkness by hands that refused to carry weapons, but never stopped reaching for the wounded. Desmond sits beside Morrison's body and tries to process what the night has cost and what it has purchased. His hands shake from exhaustion and rope burns. His body operates on adrenaline fumes and willpower. Around him, the ridge has fallen silent except for distant sounds of movement. American forces preparing another assault, Japanese forces strengthening their defenses. And somewhere in the morning light, a broken rope dangles against a cliff face, its frayed ends telling a story of impossible strain and impossible faith. 23 times it held when it should have broken. Now it hangs useless, its mission complete. The legend will say he saved 75 men, but legends multiply numbers the way they multiply everything else. The truth is, 23 wounded soldiers who rode a hemp rope down from hell because one man couldn't bear to leave them behind. The truth is a choice made in darkness, repeated 23 times to trust that faith and stubbornness might prove stronger than military necessity. The truth is that courage sometimes wears the face of an unarmed medic who stays when staying means death, reaches when reaching seems impossible, and lowers broken men to safety, one prayer at a time. 53 years later, Desmond Doss sits in a wheelchair on his front porch in Rising Fawn, Georgia, watching rain fall on mountains that remind him of other ridges in other wars. His hands, gnarled with arthritis and still marked by faint scars from rope burns, rest quietly in his lap. The Bible beside him shows the wear of daily reading, its pages soft with age and handling. When young reporters come to ask about Hacksaw Ridge, he always tells them the same thing. The rope held when it should have broken, and 23 families got their boys back. Everything else is just storytelling. The official citation accompanying his Medal of Honor speaks of 75 men rescued under fire, but numbers have a way of growing in the retelling. What matters is not the count but the choice. To stay when staying meant death, to reach when reaching seemed impossible, to trust that faith and rope fiber might prove stronger than military necessity. On quiet mornings like this, when rain strikes the roof with the same rhythm it once drummed on his helmet, Desmond can still hear voices calling from shell holes on Okinawa. Not the wounded crying for help, but the living thanking him for the chance to see home again. Williams went on to teach school in Ohio. Jackson raised 4 children in Michigan. Mitchell became a pastor in Tennessee. 23 stories that might have ended on a coral ridge now stretch across decades of American life. The nightmares stopped years ago, replaced by something closer to wonder. How had a hemp rope, tested beyond its limits, held for 23 evacuations before finally breaking? How had he moved through enemy-controlled terrain for 12 hours without being detected? How had his hands found strength to lower man after man when his body should have collapsed from exhaustion? The theological questions don't keep him awake anymore. Faith either sustains you or it doesn't, and trying to explain miracles reduces them to mechanics. What happened on Hacksaw Ridge was both simpler and more complex than divine intervention. One man making the same choice 23 times to trust his hands and his heart over military doctrine and personal safety. His granddaughter finds him there as afternoon shadows grow longer, his chair positioned to catch the mountain breeze that reminds him of other places where young men learned the weight of carrying each other home. She knows not to ask about the war directly. He's told those stories as many times as they need telling. Instead, she sits beside him and watches the rain, comfortable in the silence that veterans carry like old photographs. "Grandpa," she finally says, her voice careful with the weight of curiosity. "When people call you a hero, what do you think?" Desmond considers the question, his eyes tracking raindrops down the porch posts. Hero is a word other people use for choices that seemed inevitable at the time. When wounded men call your name from shell holes, you go to them. When they need evacuation, you find a way. When the rope breaks, you trust that 23 lives matter more than one. "I think about the rope," he tells her. "How it held when it should have broken. How many times we asked it to do impossible things, and how many times it said yes." The young woman nods, as if she understands, though understanding comes slowly to those who've never felt the weight of other people's lives in their hands. The rope itself is long gone, buried somewhere in the archives of military history, or lost to time and bureaucracy. But its memory remains, woven through testimonies and after-action reports and the quiet stories that veterans tell their grandchildren on rainy afternoons. "The rope held," Desmond repeats, his voice barely audible over the rain. "That's all that mattered. It held." Inside the house, a telephone rings with another request for an interview, another opportunity to share the legend of the unarmed medic who stayed behind when everyone else withdrew. The calls come regularly now, spurred by renewed interest in stories of faith under fire. Desmond lets his granddaughter answer while he continues watching the rain, remembering not the glory, but the weight of men too wounded to move, of choices too important to avoid, of rope fiber stretched beyond its limits by the simple faith that holding on matters more than letting go. The Medal of Honor sits in a place of honor inside, surrounded by photographs and letters from the families of men who rode a hemp rope down from hell. But the real monument to Hacksaw Ridge exists in the living, children and grandchildren of soldiers who came home because one man couldn't bear to leave them behind, couldn't accept that military necessity trumped human obligation, couldn't imagine any choice except to reach into darkness and pull out whatever life he could find. Tomorrow, there will be more interviews, more requests to explain how faith and stubbornness triumphed over tactical reality. Tonight, there is only the rain on the roof and the memory of voices answered, wounds tended, lives carried down from a ridge that should have claimed them all, the rope held. In the end, that's the only truth that matters, that when everything else failed, when military doctrine and common sense and personal safety all pointed toward abandoning the wounded, a few 100 feet of hemp fiber and one man's refusal to let go proved stronger than death itself. The rain continues, drumming its familiar rhythm on the roof, carrying the sound of prayers answered and promises kept. Outside, the mountains of Georgia rise like sleeping giants, peaceful in their silence. Inside, an old soldier sits with his memories and his Bible, grateful beyond words that grace sometimes wears the disguise of rope fiber and that miracles sometimes smell like rain on coral. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.